host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
Our rolling coverage of the G20 Leaders Summit continues here at the Johannesburg Expo Centre, also known as NASREC. The plenary continues behind closed doors, but we are trying to sift through the elements that are now contained in what has been a consensus adoption, a unanimous consensus adoption of the Leaders' Declaration. And part of that Leaders' Declaration, in the context of development, in the context of food insecurity, in the context of critical minerals and supply chains and beneficiation, has been the money. Where does the money come from, and what does that look like? What does reform of the international financial architecture look like? And we are very privileged to have the Deputy Finance Minister of South Africa, Dr. David Masondo, to help us understand what is contained in that document. Deputy Minister, a very warm welcome to SABC News.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks for having me in Tulas.
I don't only monitor your work here in South Africa, I also monitor you when you come to the United States, and most recently you were at the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank meetings, where you chaired, alongside the Reserve Bank Governor, a meeting of foreign ministers, and part of the deliberations there was the adoption or the launch of a G20 Africa engagement framework, what you described at the time as a multi-year initiative to address growth and development on the continent. You talked about the reforming of the international financial architecture, the role of multilateral banks in particular to make them better and more effective, a G20 declaration on debt sustainability, scaling up private investment in infrastructure. Has it all been contained in the document? Tell us everything.
No, definitely. I think for us and the world as a whole is how do you get economic growth? And there are issues in the global north and there are issues in the global south that are constraining impediment to economic growth. The global south, their population is declining. They've got aging population. And if your population is declining, it also means your market is also shrinking. It also means that your ability to supply labor to your economy is also shrinking.
So Japan would be a good example, right?
Would be a good example.
Yeah.
So the world is tackling those issues, but from the global south and Africa in particular. You've got a young population, you've got critical minerals, which if you tap on those, you will be able to contribute towards economic growth. One of the existential issues facing humanity today, for both global south and the global north, is climate change. How do we tackle these issues facing us? And of course, for us on the continent, Africa in particular, it's what are the specific constraints that are facing us, given the fact that we've got critical minerals, we've got young population, and how do you make sure that this young population, which is an asset, is not turned into liability? Now, you need capital to grow the African economy, and we've been working through our South African G20 with the world on how we reform the multilateral finance institutions to make sure that capital flow into Africa, and how do we get money from the private sector to move into infrastructure, to move into industrialization in order to grow our economy.
I think it's quite telling that the working group that was seized with all of this, the finance issues, is known as the Sustainable Finance Working Group, because sustainability comes into it, doesn't it, Deputy Minister? So if we go through the various elements, we keep foregrounding the issue of critical elements, leveraging those for sustainable and inclusive growth. What exactly do we mean? What is the framework that is now on the table from the work that you've been doing?
So I think for us, the critical issue is how do you get money to move towards adding value to the critical minerals that we have on the continent in order to industrialize and move away from the old colonial days in which you'll just be an exporter of the raw materials. So the key issue for us is how do we get capital to move to those industries, to those sectors of the economy in order for us to add value to these critical minerals. Through raising money through Johannesburg Stock Exchange and also through our development finance institution, DBSA, IDC, to mobilize capital to move into those sectors and have a regional approach to industrialization, to the question of infrastructure. Because in order for us to attract big checks, big money, you've got to think continentally, you've got to think regional. We can't think country-specific, Lesotho there, Swaziland there, and South Africa there, Nigeria there. We've got to think continentally, regional approach insofar as infrastructure. And we've delivered it through our G20 presidents on how you can do cross-border infrastructure.
Dr. Masondo, you've also now talked about the existentialism around climate change and its impacts. And I wonder how you will frame the artificial intelligence future, right? We talk about critical minerals in the context of beneficiation, but those critical minerals that are going to fuel the AI revolution, the electric cars, the data centers, the satellite communications, the robotics, and the list goes on. Cell phones is going to impugn the relevance of human beings, one imagines. And I wonder what chewing gum and walking looks like in that context. How do you ensure that what we take out of the earth is not actually, in the long run, going to be our nemesis?
I think the critical thing for us is increasing productivity. Let's have abundance. Let's have abundance in our economy, and AI, technology contribute towards increasing the cake.
And people are losing their jobs, though. That's the concern.
The question is, as we increase productivity, how do you share the cake? It's not to stop technology. It's not to say, no, technology must not go because people are losing jobs. It's what do you do with the productivity and benefits associated with technology. And the challenge is inequality, income inequality. And we've also produced, through Joseph Stiglitz, a report on how you deal with inequality. Because definitely, as your productivity increases, you need to make sure that there's fair distribution of what is coming out of the economy. We should not be stopping technology. We should be embracing technology. We should be embracing artificial intelligence. But as long as artificial intelligence is adopted or is concentrated in few geographic areas, Africa will be left behind. And we can't be behind the curve. We've got to be investing in artificial intelligence. We've got to be mobilizing capital towards artificial intelligence in order to increase the productivity of our economies.
The issue of debt sustainability was also quite central, and that's right up your alley as well, given your position in South Africa, but also a similar position, I suppose, in many countries that find themselves on an unsustainable path as far as debt is concerned. Many of them now spending more on debt service costs than they do on services such as education and health, for example. What does, and we can talk now, Deputy Minister, what does the consensus look like around the plan around sustainable debt coming out of this declaration?
I think debt in itself is not bad. If you are raising debt to invest in infrastructure, to invest in industrialization, that debt, as you raise it and invest it in those economic enhancing activities, it set a material basis for you to generate more revenue, to service the debt, but also to provide services to your population. The challenge is when you are not able to service that debt. And it's for this reason, under our G20 presidency, we said it's important for us to focus on economic growth, but all our sovereigns, all our countries have a responsibility to make sure that we adopt the fiscal policies that maintain debt at sustainable levels. Let's make sure that we don't spend on things that are not adding value to the economy, to our people, and we've got to make sure that we keep our debt at sustainable level. Because if your debt is not at sustainable level, there's cost associated with that. As you correctly said, your debt service cost, the interest that you're going to pay on that debt is going to increase. Because if the risk is high, because if the debt is unsustainable, because there's a chance that you may not be able to service that debt,
Deputy
and
Minister.
people charge you high interest, which has huge implications
Sherwin,
for
he's
your-
very disciplined, and I'm trying to get him to break his
He's a long-distance runner. What do you expect?
So what I'm asking, Deputy Minister, when we see the declaration, will it talk to using the instruments that we currently have, your G20 common framework on the treatment of debt, the debt service suspension initiatives? Are we likely to leverage into that in the final outcome that says, going forward for the indebted low-income countries, this may be an option that is now on the table?
No, surely. In the finance track, and like I said, for the first time, we adopted a communique here in South Africa. President said new things always come out of the continent. Since the war in Ukraine, we produced, as the finance track, a communique, which I will doubt if that communique will be ignored. I'm certain that those things that we've resolved, including transparency on debt, the common framework, are going to be part
Message
of the
discipline.
declaration.
Maybe a final question before
Yeah.
we let the Deputy Minister go. So the cost of capital is also part of this conversation, and it's also been very much linked to the role of ratings agencies. I know the Secretary General, I had a conversation with him here yesterday, and he talked about the importance of more equity in terms of how the ratings agencies propose their analysis, particularly as it relates, Deputy Minister, to countries in the African continent. Does this outcome document address the role of ratings agencies at any level?
Yes, even before this document itself, if a sovereign is not happy with the way in which the credit rating agencies are rating that particular sovereign, they can appeal to a body, international body, that is responsible for regulating the credit rating agencies and say, by your own standards, you have rated us wrongly, and therefore we are challenging you insofar as what you have rated us. Because there's consequences for rating sovereigns wrongly, because if you are rated, the risks are elevated. It means that you're going to pay the price for that. And I think it's important for us as African countries, as a global South, to stand up and say, we are not rated correctly based on your standards, not based on what we think we should be rated, but based on your standards, you are not rating us correctly.
At that IMF press conference a few months ago, the Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago made the point that countries need to have the capacity to be able to respond to what rating agencies are saying. And he was saying that the problem is that a lot of countries do not have, particularly in the African continent, the ability to go to the data and say, you've made a mistake here, this is why we think you are wrong. And so that capacity, so the pushback matters as well, does it not?
No, it does. And I think the AU, the African Union itself, has built the capacity to challenge the wrong ratings on different parts of the continent. And they've taken on behalf of those countries where the rating agencies got it wrong. There's a couple of countries that the AU itself has intervened to say, but this particular case, you did not do it right, and therefore we want you to reconsider the way in which you have rated this particular country. But building the capacity of those countries, it's important so that they don't just rely on a supra or continental bodies such as the AU.
So do you have a spring in your step after that adoption? You a happy guy?
More than happy. I think the mood, the macroeconomic conditions in South Africa are very, very encouraging. We're out of the grey list. We've been upgraded by Standard & Poor. We got inflation, target framework. There's a lot of things, great things happening in South Africa. And I hope, Sherwin, when you go back to New York, you will report that there's great things happening in South Africa.
I'll tell the viewers this. When you ask someone if they're happy and they say, well, the microeconomic conditions are such and such, you know they're a serious guy.
Yeah.
Dr. David Masondo, good to see you,
Deputy
sir.
Minister, thank you. Long distance runner, so having gone the full distance and as far as being part of the finance track as in the build-up to the G20 Leaders Summit, taking us through some of the details that are coming through.